Are you ready for one of the easiest and most delicious recipes using simple ingredients like ground beef and just a few other things? Well, let me tell you, this recipe for Salisbury steak is going to blow your mind. Welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. This recipe is not only simple, delicious, it is also very quick to make. So we're gonna make Salisbury steak using ground beef. I have an 80-20 mixture, 1 pound of ground chuck is what I'm using. You could use a leaner cut if you wanted to, or you could use ground sirloin. It'll be perfectly fine because we're gonna add some fillers to this. We're gonna add some spices and some other ingredients, which is gonna keep the hamburger patties super moist. Now, traditionally, Salisbury steak can be made with either ground beef or cube steak. And you could definitely adapt this recipe to use cube steak, but you would have to change your pressure cook times or your slow cook times if you opt to go the slow cooking method. And you would also want to increase the ingredients in the gravy because you're not going to be able to add all the deliciousness that I add to the ground beef. So do yourself a favor, make this version first and see how delicious it is before you try the cube steak. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is get some oil into a hot pot. So the first thing I'm gonna do is turn on the Ninja Foodi. And it's gonna default to sear saute. High is what we want, and hit start. Now there's nothing in the pot right now. I want it to start heating up before I add in some olive oil. You're gonna want about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, or you could use whatever oil you want. Avocado oil, anything will work fine. We have the pound of 80-20 ground chuck here, and now let's start adding in the ingredients. First thing I'm gonna add is a 1/4 cup of panko. Panko are coarse breadcrumbs, which is sort of interesting, okay? And I'm gonna tell you how this came about because it's kind of funny. I wanted to test the recipe for Salisbury steak, and I was at home, and I didn't have any breadcrumbs at home, but I had panko, and I thought, well, I'll test the recipe with panko, and then I'll change it over for breadcrumbs, because ordinarily I would never put panko into like a meatloaf or anything like that. I would put in finer breadcrumbs or oatmeal. It was so delicious that I said, I'm leaving this recipe completely alone. So I'm gonna stick with panko, 1/4 cup, but you could also use regular breadcrumbs. I'm sure it'll be just as delicious. Or if you want to add in a 1/4 cup of oatmeal, you could do that as well. Then we're gonna add in our spice blend, okay? What I have here is 1 teaspoon of fine grind sea salt, 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of dried basil, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, and 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. Now, a little secret, which I'm not gonna do because I've already tested this recipe, so I don't need to do this. But if you wanted to change the seasonings, you didn't want to use my seasoning blend, you had some, favorite seasoning blend that you wanted to use in this, it's perfectly fine. Once you mix everything up, get all the ingredients in and mix it up, throw a tiny bit, like a tablespoon, form it into a little patty, and fry it off in your pan. Then taste it for seasonings, because obviously you don't want to taste the ground beef when it's raw. So cook it. Then you're going to know what your hamburger patties are going to taste like, okay? So that's just a little tip there. Now I'm going to add in 1 large egg, 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. This is kind of one of my secret ingredients here. 2 tablespoons of sour cream. You could probably also use Greek yogurt if you prefer, but I loved the way this turned out. Then I have a 1/4 cup of finely diced onion. This is optional, but I really liked the texture that it added to the hamburger patties, so I encourage you to use it, but it is optional. The flavor will be good without it because we've got the onion powder in there. Then we're just gonna mix this up. Now you could do it the long way like this and just keep folding it until it's all mixed, or you could do what I do, which is use my hands because they are the best tool you have for mixing, and just get in there with clean hands and mix it up until everything is well incorporated. All right, once everything is really well mixed, then we're gonna form our hamburger patties. And I do that right in this bowl. I make 6 hamburger patties out of this. I find that that is a good portion for a dinner serving. But if you have a really hungry person or you just want to divide it into 4 patties, you absolutely can, no problems. But I like the 6, and then if somebody's really hungry, they can have 2 of the patties if they want it. I like the size of them. But they're gonna cook the same, you know, in the time that we pressure cook. It'll be perfectly fine if you go a little bit bigger. So what I do, because I want them to be as equal as possible, what I do is I take my mixture and I divide it in half. You know, I don't measure or anything, just eyeball it. Then take your meat mixture and sort of, you know, spread it out like this, and then just third it. So you have a total of 6 portions, 6 balls, okay? They almost look like unformed meatballs right now, which is another thing you could do. You could make this into a meatball, which would be delicious. It kind of reminds me of Swedish meatballs in a way. So, all right, there's our 6 balls of meat. Then what you want to do, this is different from when you're going to form a hamburger patty. When we form a hamburger patty to eat like a hamburger on a bun, we want it to be loosely packed because we want to bite into it and have it not feel dry and dense. However, this is a little bit different. We want to pack the meat pretty well. So go ahead, form that ball and move it between your hands, kind of smack it in between and get it compressed as much as possible. Then pat it out pretty thin, okay? So it's probably about a 1/4 inch or so. They're gonna shrink up as they cook. They're gonna puff up a little bit as they cook because we're gonna do a hot fry on them in the Ninja Foodi in the inner pot. So we want them kind of big like this. Now I'm just gonna lay them right out here. Repeat this for the rest of the hamburger mixture that you've separated into individual balls here. They don't have to be super uniform in shape. It's not gonna matter, but you don't want them splitting either. Once your pot has heated up, or your pan on the stove, because you could definitely do this on the stove, for about 5 to 7 minutes, add in 2 tablespoons of oil of your choice and let that heat up just about 2 minutes or so. Then we're gonna get in the patties here that we just formed. And you should hear them sizzle, okay? Now what we're gonna do is only cook as many as we can fit comfortably in the pan, which for me right now is going to be 3. Because what you wanna do is make sure that they are fully set and brown on the one side before you flip them, because they're kind of delicate right now. We've got a lot of moisture in the ingredients that we added to the ground beef, so they're a little delicate. And if you go to flip them too soon or you crowd them, they're not gonna brown correctly and they might start to fall apart. So 3 at a time in the Ninja Foodi, depends on how big your saute pan is. You could do, 3, 4, or maybe all of them if you have a really large pan. So we're gonna let these brown on one side, which is gonna take about 2 minutes or so. Flip them, let them brown on the other side. We'll move them, we'll leave them in the pot. We'll move them to the side because now they're fully set, even though they're not fully cooked. We'll repeat that with the rest of the hamburger patties. Then we'll get in some onions. We'll talk about some other things you can add in, and we will finish off the sauce that we're gonna put in, or at least the liquids we're gonna put in to go under pressure. So the hamburger patties are all cooked, and you can see that I've kind of stacked them up on this side because I want to get the onions in there. This Salisbury steak is made with an onion gravy. A lot of times it's made with mushrooms, and I did test the recipe that way the first time. It's absolutely delicious, but I know there's some people out there that don't particularly like mushrooms, so I thought I would leave it out of the recipe. However, feel free, if you're a mushroom lover like I am, add in 8 ounces of quartered either baby portobello mushrooms or white button mushrooms now to the mixture, and it's going to be absolutely delicious. You'll have mushrooms and onions. Or if you're not an onion fan, omit the onions and just use the mushrooms. Perfectly fine. All right, now that these onions have absorbed some of the grease from the burgers and the olive oil that was left over in the pan, I'm gonna add in some garlic. Totally optional. I've tested the recipe without it and with it. My husband thought it tasted a little bit better maybe with the garlic the second time, so I'm gonna leave it in the recipe, but honestly, I didn't notice that much of a difference, so it's up to you. What I have here is 4 crushed garlic, okay? So I just took the cloves of garlic, cut off each end, smashed them with the side of my knife, the flat part of the knife, and kind of crush them, and then the paper peels off. So they're just crushed. This is a large surface area, so it's not minced. It's not going to be real pungent. If you wanted to add in minced garlic, only add in about a clove of minced garlic or about a teaspoon max, okay? Or it'll be too overwhelming. All right, those are looking really good. You don't have to worry about any browning on the onions. I mean, you could sit here and saute them until they get a little brown, but honestly, it's not gonna make a difference in the gravy that much. So if you wanna just move on with the recipe like I'm going to, just go right ahead. I am gonna season them though. 1 teaspoon of fine ground sea salt, half of a teaspoon of black pepper. That is gonna be our seasoning for our gravy, okay? You could add in some garlic if you wanted. Like if you omitted the garlic cloves, add in some garlic powder. You could use onion powder, basil, whatever you want. It's perfectly fine. But this is what I found just gave such a great flavor. All right, now we wanna get those hamburger patties over the onions like this. Now, whether they're directly on the bottom of the pot or over the onions does not make a bit of difference, so don't worry about that. What I do make sure, though, is that nothing's stuck to the bottom of the pot. As I go through, I just kind of scrape down the bottom with my turner here. And you can see these are darker. That's because they were on the bottom longer. Not going to make a difference. Don't worry. Okay, we need thin liquid to go under pressure. We're gonna use 1 cup of beef stock. I have 1.5 cups in here. We're gonna reserve the last half of a cup for after pressure cooking so we can thicken our gravy. So 1 cup. And if you use a little bit more, don't worry about it. It's not gonna make a big difference, but make sure you try to leave out at least 1/4 cup. And that is it. We are ready to go under pressure. Now, the pot's really hot, so it's gonna go under pressure fairly quickly. Put the lid down, turn it off. If you're using the slider 1 lid model, put your slider all the way over. If you're using the 2 lid model of an Instant Pot or a Ninja Foodi, just put your pressure lid on and make sure it's in the seal position. We're gonna go to pressure cook on high, and we're gonna go to 5 minutes. Now 5 minutes is a little bit long. Their burgers are really not gonna take that long to cook through, but I found it was so delicious when I did this timing that I just left it alone. If you wanna play around with the timing, try to back it down to 3 minutes. I think you'll be perfectly fine. Everything will be cooked through, and the onions might retain a little bit more of a bite to them, a little crispiness, if you like it that way. But I found 5 minutes was absolutely perfect. Then we'll do an immediate release and we will thicken up our gravy and get ready to serve our Salisbury steak. That is how quick and easy it is. And one other thing, if you want to stack some cubed potatoes on top, feel free to do that. I have not tested the recipe that way, but I thought about it and I thought, you know, it'd be really easy to put the rack on, in the high position, put a 6-inch pan there, put some water and some potatoes, really finely chopped, probably no more than 1-inch cubes, okay? And let them pressure cook at the same time. And then you could make some mashed potatoes, drain the water out, and make some mashed potatoes to serve with it. Once the pressure has released completely and it's safe to open up the pressure cooker lid, go ahead and do that. That took about 2 minutes for me. So we had a 3-minute time to pressure, 5-minute pressure cook, and then a 2-minute pressure release time. So that's your total pressure cook time from start to finish. Now we're gonna thicken up the gravy. First thing I add in is another tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. And we're gonna use the remaining beef stock or beef broth with 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. Now there's several other ways you could do this. I mean, you could technically thicken it with a flour slurry. I prefer the cornstarch just because we don't cook it that long, and if you don't cook flour long enough, it can leave a floury kind of taste, which I don't like. So I prefer the cornstarch slurry for this recipe. Or you could make a roux on your stove if you wanted to. Equal parts flour and butter. So 2 tablespoons of flour, 2 tablespoons of butter. Make the roux and then stir it in if you wanted to, and add in the remaining bit of beef stock or broth. Whatever you're using is fine. Pour that in. Usually what I find is that the mixture is hot enough to activate the cornstarch and thicken the gravy. And I just leave it on keep warm and I just stir it. However, if that's not the case for you, if it's not thickening, turn on your sear saute mode and thicken it that way. So I just flip over these burgers so that they get underneath this delicious gravy. You could also remove the burgers if it's a little cumbersome for you to actually, stir the gravy while the burgers are in there. You could remove them if you want. But see, it's already thickening up. Now, how thick you want your gravy is completely up to you. I've made this with 1.25 cups of beef stock, and I did slow cooking method, so we had a little evaporation, and the gravy was a little bit thicker. Jeff prefers it a little bit thinner, so this is how I set the recipe up. But it's up to you. So you could use less of the stock or add another tablespoon of the cornstarch if you wanted it a little bit thicker. Okay, that is looking so good. Oh my gosh. So I think the thickness is pretty good, okay? It's not super thick, but it's definitely thick enough to cling to the burger, which is what we want. Last addition, 1/4 cup of sour cream. Do not knock this until you try it. It is absolutely amazing. It adds a little bit of tang, just like we added a little tang to the burger meat by adding in the sour cream. We're gonna add a little bit of tang to this sauce. It's completely optional though. It also lightens the sauce up a little bit, which I happen to like the look of it, but again, totally optional. Now look how luxurious that's looking now. Oh my goodness. So stir it until everything is incorporated, and then you are ready to serve your Salisbury steak. All right, there we go. Oh my gosh, this is so amazing. If only I had some steamed broccoli and some mashed potatoes on the side, this would be the perfect meal. Now, I want to talk about the onions because you don't see a whole lot of them in here. And that is because of the 5-minute pressure cook time. They kind of really soften up and they flavor the sauce really nicely, but there's not big chunks. I mean, there's a few here and there, but a lot of them just sort of disappear. That's not what you like. Lower your pressure cook time a little bit and see how they do that way. Or you could always saute some onions on the side, extra onions. Leave the 2 onions in the broth because that flavors it, but add some extra onions in at the end. Or add in some mushrooms, like I said. You could add those right to the pressure cooker because they pressure cook beautifully. All right, now this Salisbury steak made with ground beef is so tender, so moist, and so delicious. You absolutely do not need any kind of a knife at all, okay? It is amazingly tender. Like, it's the best texture on a burger, even though it's Salisbury steak, but on a burger that I think I've ever had that's fully cooked, okay? Because this is fully cooked. It's not medium rare like I like my burgers, but oh my gosh, it was so amazing. I was blown away. That's why I said you're gonna be blown away by this recipe. I was blown away the first time I made it. And I didn't even think I was gonna like it. It's delicious. Oh. I am telling you, it has so much flavor. The meat pretty much just melts in your mouth, but you still know it's, meat. It's not like mushy. It's just got the best texture. The sauce is flavored absolutely perfectly. I cannot say enough good things about this dish. I absolutely love it. You can pressure cook it, you can slow cook it, you can just simmer it on the stove any way you want. I mean, you could even brown your meat up and you could make this an oven casserole. There's so many different ways to make it. So no matter what appliance you want to use, you can make this recipe. And I'll go over more details on my website, thesaltedpepper.com. Just look up Salisbury steak.